New Year's Eve, 2008, New York City. The festive lights illuminate the streets of the Big Apple. Snow falls as Ruth and Bernard prepare for bed in their Manhattan apartment, a luxurious penthouse with nearly a century of history, valued at about $7 million. This year, there won't be a family dinner. Ruth and Bernard are heading to sleep, but not before ingesting a lethal dose of zolpidem and clonazepam. Bernard has been exposed, accused of embezzling $65 billion, and his countless victims are crying out for justice. This marks the beginning of the story of the rise and fall of the greatest fraudster in United States history, Bernard Madoff. Beginning. In his youth, Bernie Madoff was an ordinary young man from a middle-class New York family of Jewish descent. He studied political science in college and held typical jobs, such as a lifeguard or an installer of irrigation systems. A former college classmate was quoted in the New York Times saying, "Bernie was very hardworking, attending classes and working at the same time." This friend and his wife used to have dinner with Madoff every month, although at that time, he lived in a small apartment in Queens. For Bernie, that wasn't enough. With his earnings, he managed to save $5,000, and at 22, using this money and a $50,000 loan from his father-in-law, he decided to start his own business. In 1960, he founded Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities LLC, a brokerage firm specializing in low-cost stocks, known as penny stocks, through which he made his fortune, becoming a prominent figure on Wall Street. That, however, is a story for another time. Initially, his company was modest, but soon stood out for pioneering a practice known as payment for order flow. This somewhat controversial strategy involves charging fees for directing client orders to market makers. This allows a broker to offer very low or even zero commissions to their clients. However, this creates a conflict of interest, as the broker might favor the market maker that pays the highest commission, rather than the one offering the best prices for their client. From a young age, Madoff showed promise. While legal, the payment for order flow practice was met with suspicion, but on Wall Street, he was simply seen as a promising young man. In the 1960s, stock trading was manual and slow. Bernard's firm, among others, led the way in digitalizing these operations and contributed to the creation of NASDAQ in 1971, the first electronic stock exchange and one of the most significant in the world. Gradually, Madoff gained influence on Wall Street, eventually becoming the president of NASDAQ for several years. He became a regular donor to Democratic politicians and even had family members working in the SEC, the regulatory body responsible for uncovering frauds. In this way, Madoff established himself as a respected and well-connected man. The necklace strategy. It was rumored that in the early 1990s, around 10% of all transactions on the New York Stock Exchange were conducted through Madoff's brokerage firm. At that time, Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities LLC also covertly operated as a hedge fund. A hedge fund is a financial entity where large investors, both individuals and institutions, place their money to earn profits. It offered returns slightly higher than the market average. From 1991 to 2007, the S&P 500 grew an average of 10.4%. However, the returns Madoff offered varied between 12% and 17.5%. He explained to investors that he used a technique called split strike conversion, also known as the collar strategy. It's a legal method that prevents significant losses but also limits gains. This investment style is quite complex for someone without financial training. It involves buying an asset, such as a stock, acquiring a put option for that asset, and selling a call option on the same asset. What they actually did was simpler. They took investors' money and deposited it into a bank account. If an investor wanted to withdraw their capital, they used another investor's money to pay it. However, withdrawing funds was not common. Madoff, known for his credibility and the returns he promised, created an exclusive atmosphere. There was a long waiting list to invest with him, and investors often waited years to get in, so they preferred not to withdraw their money once inside. Madoff had convinced them that investing with him was an honor, and in a way, it was. There was a certain lack of transparency. Participation was based on personal connections and privileges. We're talking about billionaires, business owners, Hollywood celebrities, and public figures. Before we continue with the video, please subscribe and support me so I can keep posting videos. The truth is, this takes time and incurs some expenses. So, thank you if you hit the follow button and join this community. Harry Markopoulos, 1999, at the offices of RAM Management. Harry Markopoulos, a finance expert, works at Rampart Investment Management. One day, he learns that an associate, Access International Advisors, is collaborating with a hedge fund yielding 1% to 3% monthly returns. The consistency of these profits catches his attention, and he discusses the matter with his superiors, Frank Casey and Neil Cello. Casey makes several calls, speaks with the director of Access, and discovers that the person behind this mysterious hedge fund and its notable gains is none other than Bernard Madoff, who is implementing a split-strike conversion strategy. His bosses meet with Markopoulos and assign him a task to unravel the secrets behind Madoff's strategy, reverse engineer it, and replicate it for Rampart. From that moment, Markopoulos becomes the chief adversary of Bernard, the man destined to uncover his secret and determined to expose it. Harry Markopoulos had a special talent for numbers. He began his investigation by analyzing the returns and, within just 5 minutes, realized that something was amiss. At that time, what most captured Markopoulos' attention was the trend in profits. According to him, despite the usual market fluctuations, Madoff's gains were always on the rise. Only in 4% of the months did he report losses. It seemed like a deceit, but how it was executed remained unknown. One theory Markopoulos and his team considered was that Madoff was using insider information. Another possibility was that Madoff was running a large-scale Ponzi scheme. In 2000, Markopoulos compiled all his evidence and sent it to the SEC, but surprisingly, received no response. Madoff, a key figure on Wall Street and well-connected, was ignored by the SEC, which dismissed Markopoulos' warnings up to 5 times. Nevertheless, Markopoulos did not cease his investigation and concluded that, to implement the split-strike conversion strategy Madoff claimed to use, he would have had to purchase more options than were available on the Chicago Board Options Exchange. Markopoulos consulted with known investors to see if they had dealings with Madoff. All denied any such relationship. It appeared that Madoff was not conducting any real operations, and thus Markopoulos confirmed it was a Ponzi scheme. During these 9 years, all of us have feared for our lives at some point, he stated. Our analysis indicates that Madoff's fund and the veil of secrets surrounding it posed a significant risk to those who questioned and investigated it. He continued his investigative work and warnings towards the SEC, which still ignored him, but he did not give up. The case was so significant to him that, in 2004, disillusioned with Wall Street, he left his job at Rampart to become an independent investigator of financial frauds. The SEC, in theory, encourages such investigations by offering rewards to those who expose frauds, but in practice, despite having evidence, they failed to uncover any frauds. Markopoulos was ignored until 2006, the year when the SEC finally initiated an investigation against Madoff. The full force of the American regulator was deployed against Bernard L. Madoff's fund. After 11 months of exhaustive investigation, account reviews, calculations, and verifications, they concluded that Markopoulos was mistaken. Bernard Madoff was not committing any fraud, and Harry Markopoulos' accusations were due to his lack of knowledge of Madoff's operations in Europe. Final, 2007, New York City. Bear Stearns, a significant fund manager in the United States, collapses. It's followed by Lehman Brothers and a series of bankruptcies and financial bailouts that have a global impact. The financial crisis of 2008 becomes a disaster for everyone, except for Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities, which still reports profits, nearly equal to those before the crisis. Madoff was scrambling to gather funds while investors were requesting to withdraw their money. Rumors circulated that there were withdrawal requests amounting to up to $7 billion, but the actual funds available barely reached $200 million. Madoff's Ponzi scheme finally collapsed. On the night of December 10, 2008, Bernard Madoff gathered his family in his apartment. The following morning, FBI agents arrived at his home to arrest him. It was his own sons who had denounced him. In the end, it wasn't Harry Markopoulos or the SEC who exposed the fraud, but Madoff himself when he confessed. Before being sentenced, Bernard and his wife attempted suicide in their Manhattan apartment, as Ruth recounted in an interview with 60 Minutes, but they did not succeed. In June 2009, Bernard Madoff was sentenced to 150 years in prison, where he died of natural causes on April 14, 2021. Both his sons and his wife repeatedly claimed to know nothing of his actions, although many did not believe them. In 2012, one of Madoff's sons died of cancer, and a month later, the other took his own life. Everyone was corrupt. I just let myself be influenced, he declared in an interview with New York Magazine. In the next video of this series, you'll learn about the story of a man who invented and sold a country, making himself rich in the process. Thanks for watching this far. Remember to subscribe and turn on notifications so you get alerted by YouTube when a new video is released.